Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome, everyone, to Miami MoCAAD Museum of Contemporary Art of the African Diaspora's Afro-Latinx Creative Conversation Series. Today is the final in a four-part series focusing on the Afro-Latinx experience. My name is Corbin Graves, and I'm the Interactive Media Director for Miami MoCAAD. I would like to start with thanks. Thank you for your support during Give Miami Day 2021. If you missed Give Miami Day, you may support Miami MoCAAD on this coming Tuesday, November 30th, which is Giving Tuesday. It would be great if you would go to miamimocaad.org's donate page. You can find that in our navigation at the top. It says donate. Your continued support goes to paid internship opportunities and to make it possible for us to host art events like this one. Now, a little information. Miami MoCAAD's goal, or one of Miami MoCAAD's goals and mission, is to discover, commission, collect, and preserve the work of the most advanced contemporary artists of the global African diaspora, and to exhibit this art at the highest level, both at home and abroad. Miami MoCAAD is fortunately located in Miami-Dade County, which is a crossroads of continents and cultures. And Miami MoCAAD wishes to make new and innovative ways of communicating, building, and fostering novel contexts for identity and creative ways to experience museums. Miami MoCAAD, the Museum of Contemporary Art of the African Diaspora, will blend art and technology and cross boundaries to bring exciting, compelling, and memorable experiences and connect people, communities, and locally, nationally, and globally. Today's conversation is titled Arte, Historia y Cultura, Art, History, and Culture. I want to introduce today's moderator, curator, art historian, and educator, Dr. Erica James. Artist, educator, Kandy Lopez. Artist, designer, Patricia Encarnación. Advocate, author, Orlando Addison will wrap up the conversation with a short response. A recorded version of this webinar will be available on the Miami MoCAAD's YouTube channel and posted a few days after this conversation. All links will be posted in the chat. There will be a Q&A portion of the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. Please send your questions in the Zoom or Facebook Live chat to our interns, Ashley Caleb and Christian Allen, and they will send them along to our Q&A moderator, intern Luz Estrella Cruz. That being said, this conversation promises to be very interesting and very fruitful. So if we are unable to get all your questions answered, they can be asked in the afterwards, where we will all be able to have a short post conversation with the panelists and the Miami MoCAAD team. The purpose of this section is so that you can get to know our team and speak to the panelists directly. This part of the conversation will not be recorded. Closing remarks will be made by Marilyn Holifield, partner at Holland & Knight, international law firm and co-founder of Miami MoCAAD. Again, thank you for joining us this evening, and welcome to Miami MoCAAD's final in a four-part series focusing on the Afro-Latinx experience: Arte, Historia, Cultura, Art, History, and Culture. Now, I will hand it over to Dr. James.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can everyone see the slideshow? Can you see it? Okay, let's start from the beginning. Okay. I just want to thank Miami MoCAAD for the vision to put this together, this conversation together, and for inviting me to be in conversation with Kandy and Patricia. It's been a pleasure meeting them. It's been a pleasure starting this conversation over the last few weeks, and I'm really looking forward, I think, to sharing their work with this audience. Kandy G. Lopez and Patricia Encarnación are contemporary artists who've really embraced their Afro-Latina Dominican identity and in ways that really directly inform their practice. To say that Blackness within Dominican identity is complex would be an understatement. But as you can imagine, it is therefore very fertile ground, a very fertile point of departure for their work, as much as I think we can see it as an opening, through which they formulate visual language to enunciate and critically engage these complexities in direct and very nuanced ways. From the outset, though, I want to be clear that their artwork cannot be flattened by the dismissive and hence disposable phrase that we sometimes hear, oh, it's about identity. That really bothers me. Their work is far more layered, yet precise in its deployment and brings questions of Blackness and being into full view in process. In order to give this conversation a bit of order, I will begin by speaking with Kandy about her work, and then we will turn to Patricia. But I want Kandy and Patricia to both be a part of the conversation at the same time as well. Like if you feel the need to chime in, Patricia or Kandy, when I'm talking to each of you, feel free. Let's try to make this as as natural as possible, given the medium. So I'm going to start the conversation right away with Kandy, and I wanted to show some of Kandy's older work. And I don't know if she would even call this older work, but I wanted to start with some of her older work before we turn to more recent work, partly because she's a painter, and she's a painter's painter, and she's interested in representations of the body. But even when we don't see the body, when I look at Kandy's work, I still feel the body. I still feel the body when there's no literal body represented. So I guess my first question, Kandy, to you would be, what is it about the body, that makes it an important conceptual vehicle for your practice? What are you interested in communicating when you focus on the human body? And you can start with this, the works that we are looking at on the screen, but then we can morph into your more recent work.
Well, I think that titling it older work is important because the one to your left-hand side is actually a self-portrait that I did in my undergraduate. And that was the first time that I felt like I was representing the way that I felt I looked like. For those that know me, I'm like 5'0", so I'm pretty short. But I have kind of like that Napoleon complex where I feel like I'm bigger than what it is that I am, truthfully. And I think that I use the body as a way to kind of understand myself and the way that I function and how I'm seen in our culture and in society, not only as an Afro-Caribbean woman, but also as other, specifically in the United States. And other when I go to DR too, because I wasn't born there, like DR as in Dominican Republic. I was born here in New Jersey, so it's kind of like I don't fit in there and I don't fit in here. And I feel like finding the people that I identify as someone who has kind of like this swagger within them is trying to put myself into that body where I feel like I don't have swagger, but like I'm living kind of through these people that I am representing that are not seen in galleries or museums. Yeah.
Right. Now, taking a look, I just want everyone to take these images in for a moment because they do have swagger. And one of the individuals we talked about as a kind of reference point when I first saw you and looked at these pieces was Barkley Hendricks. And we mentioned the artist Barkley Hendricks, partly because you said really something really interesting to me. As many people know, Barkley Hendricks was someone who was interested in the swagger. He was interested in representing that kind of je ne sais quoi, that quality that that people, mostly Black people, had in what they projected, this kind of power they projected on the streets. And for you, it's similar, but I was really struck by how you talked about doing that projection and that swagger specifically as a minority person in the United States. And you said something about the way swagger becomes a kind of defense.
Yeah.
When you can you talk a little bit more about that in relation to those images we just saw, but also some of your new work?
Well, growing up in the city, so again, like I mentioned, I was born in Jersey, but I moved down to Hialeah when I was like 8 or 9, and then we pretty much grew up in Miami Gardens, and I went to school at Northern Middle, so that was in Opelika. So I'm used to like growing up in a city environment, and I'm used to growing up around others, right? So that's the term that we're gonna use. And I always felt as a young person that the way that minorities dressed was completely different from what you would see on screens, right? What was supposed to be like our societal standards. And I didn't understand why I was attracted to that until I got to grad school, or I would say maybe the ending of my undergraduate. But when I started really diving into this idea of like, why are we performing this idea of swagger, and why do we have to? And I also like was interested in psychology, so I took a lot of psychology courses where I felt like this was a way of standing out. So in my website, I quote Ebony Patterson and her use of using the word, she didn't say swagger, but she said like the way that we are representing ourselves so that we can come out of this cloud of invisibility, right? So you're putting on this facade that you have to because you're from the streets, right? You need to protect yourself at all means. So you have kind of like this mask on when you go out in comparison to when you come home, you take the mask off, right? You become this completely different person. And I feel like that defense mechanism comes out a lot when we're in the streets because we are invisible. And we want to be visible at some point. And if that means that I have to wear an all yellow suit, you know, with a dandy hat, then that's what I'm going to be wearing so that you can see me. Because you see color. Like, that's one of the statements that really bugs me when people say, I see no color. Like, so you don't see me. And I feel like my pieces, like, get into that is just subtle.
They do, and you can see that with the pieces on the screen now. Even the straightness of their back, the way that the shoulders are a bit squared. I mean, there are these sort of subtle gestures that you capture in your work that really do communicate, a kind of presence that's powerful and definitive. But what one of the reasons I also juxtapose these images is the fact that even though you're a painter, you don't always paint with paint, right? You deconstruct, to use the fancy languages, I think the assumptions of painting, right? And you engage this sort of two-dimensional surface through various mediums. And what we saw and what we're looking at now represents a really important shift, I think, in your work. And this is closer to some of the work you've been doing for the last 5 years. Talk a little bit about material and process and the shift that you've made from, acrylic or oil paint, that sort of liquid, material to what you're doing here. How are you painting now with fiber?
So I'm an artist that gets really bored with things that I have already learned. Like, I feel like not that I'm a master at painting, I just feel like I have reached my plateau in learning the technical aspect of painting. So when I get bored with a certain thing, I move on to a different medium. And that means like going out to Michael's and looking at the clearance section and saying, oh, this is, 50% off, let me buy this. So I ended up buying some yarn, and then figuring out how I can make a person out of yarn. So these are actually 7.5 by 5 feet tall, and they are yarn on plastic canvas. So then the plastic canvas, which is the background, is painted with acrylic. That's where you kind of see this foggy or ghost-like city that's in the background. And you know, yarn talks a lot about our history, right? So women are usually the ones that are associated with like embroidering, and making something soft, and showcasing kind of like the domestic side, right? But then again, I'm using yarn to create these powerful figures, them being so big and also being a minority and also standing out from the background, is really important to me. So I'm playing a lot now with fabrics and trying to like put the fabrics in with the yarn to see what I can make, because it's also about fashion and the way that we represent ourselves.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm interested in playing around with different materials, and right now in my life, at this point, it's yarn.
Okay. So by the time we get to Brooklyn Betty,
Yes.
this is a piece you recently finished. I just wanted people to really look at the detail involved with this work on the right side. Sometimes I think I'm dyslexic. On the right side of the screen, I always mix up my rights and lefts. But what I find interesting here is that in the earlier pieces that we just saw, they're situated in a city, right? They're in a cityscape. We see, even if it's ghost-like, we know that they're placed in a space. By the time we get to Brooklyn Betty, the space has disappeared, and she sort of reappears again when we get to Sue. You know, this ghostly sort of city space. And I moved to Miami about 4 years ago, and I'm fascinated by this city and the idea of the city. And I talk a little bit about what it means to situate the figure in this way for you. I mean, why the city space? And is this space meant to be read as Miami? Is this Opalaka? What is the space important, or is playing with no space in space? What does that mean? Miami is a really curious city. I think we underestimate it so much, but you know, what's
In
up with the city here?
in the beginning of my art practice, I was just creating people with no space. Like it was just an endless environment. It was pretty raw,
Mhm,
and they weren't situated anywhere. But I thought that it was important to represent where these people come from, because it's not
mhm,
just that they are this person with nothing in the background, just like, you know, our experiences and where we grew up and make us who we are.
mhm,
I felt like that was important in representing who the person was that I chose to represent.
mhm,
For example, Sue, who is the person that I chose to create out of yarn, is actually Jamaican. She was born in Jamaica. She migrated here, and she grew up here in Miami. So that becomes part of her identity, and her identity is important within the space. And
mhm,
I didn't want to represent just Jamaica because she's been living here for a longer period of time. But I also wanted, which is something that Dr. James and I went back and forth on, with if it was Miami or was it supposed to represent like a cityscape in general. And I think that my work is best when it's not situated in a particular city. Like it's not Sue in Miami, it's just Sue in her particular area. Or, you know, I want the audience to feel like they kind of know this person, but not really. And they kind of know the space, but not really. Where there's like this connection of person versus location. And then at the
mhm,
same time, like there's some figures that I feel like don't need a space. Like the
mhm,
person can transcend from one location to another, which is where we got Brooklyn Betty. Um, Even the title should say where she's from, right? But her image should be powerful enough where she doesn't need to be in a space
mhm,
to
mhm,
showcase where she's from.
mhm. But you do call her Brooklyn.
Yes.
You do call her Brooklyn, and it situates us in a way. I don't want to give up on Miami. I think I like the fact that I think about Miami. I'm sorry, I'm like jumping all over the place with this, but I like the fact that I can situate Sue in Miami, and that Miami itself can become other things. You know, it's still a kind of city space, but it can be other things. Because I think even as I was looking and preparing for this conversation and looking at your work again, Kandy, I started to think how it becomes a kind of conversation of this very complex space that's an immigrant city, right? The majority of people in Miami are from somewhere else. And in a way, there's a little community of artists, the Purvis Youngs, the T. Eliot Manzas, his early paintings, the Adele Guerrier and the photographer Edras, what's his name, Telusuma, who takes a lot of images of Miami that I think is kind of, all of a sudden an exhibition started to come in my head that became really powerful. Like I could really see this, your work in conversation with these artists, you know, about this very complex city that most of us think we're visiting when we visit, South Beach, but, is completely different. But there's something really rich that you in the way you situate them in this particular city, and yeah, don't give up on Miami. I don't know. But part of that situation, the way you situate your figures reminds me of Dawood Bey, right? Particularly the photography of Dawood Bey, particularly this piece that I teach all the time in my African-American art history class, because you not only situate your subjects, you make sure that they're in the middle of the space, right? The middle of the street, the middle of it all. Talk about this a little bit, the composition, your insistence on this centering. I mean, is it all conscious or did it just evolve? I mean, what's happening there?
I feel like the person is what's important, and I want the person to be in the middle of everything. I don't feel like the city so much is or should take away from the person that's being represented, even though it is a part of them. So 1 point perspective, in my view, takes your view as a viewer straight into the middle of the space, which is why my backgrounds are kind of foggy. So like having that acrylic going through the holes, right, and showcasing the silhouette of the figure in the other image that you showcase, where it's just little dots that showcase the city, but it's not like a straight on painted city, because that's not what's important. What's important is the white space that's around, why it's white space in comparison to the little points that are around that particular person. So the fading away of the city, the gentrification of what's happening within any city, because if I say Miami or I say Newark, right, or Chicago, like all of that is being gentrified. All of the culture they're trying to take away, but the person still stands, and they still take that with them. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
no, we're going to come back to it. We're going to come back to it, because I have several ways to circle back into the work. And one of them is the way you, last year when we were all shut down, you installed these pieces as a part of the AIM biennial that Will Cordova, Maria Vickles, and G. Moreno curated in Miami last year. And you have chosen to install these pieces in several different ways. Now, I want you to talk about that, and I'm going to show several versions of that. But I also want you to talk a little bit more about that negative space. About maybe when I show that installation. So the first iteration at the AIM Biennial was that you almost, you install these yarn paintings almost as mats, as if it was a kind of red carpet on the steps of the Dade County Courthouse. And then, this is another version of that. And so that was the first iteration. Right. But more recently, you installed it in a gallery space like this. Okay. So talk a little bit about the play. I mean, what's happening in terms of your choices to install the works in these different ways?
So my mind runs at like 100 miles per second. So when I am thinking about how it is that I'm going to display a piece, becomes as important as the piece. When I first started off creating these rugs, is what I called them, they were meant to be on the floor so that people can walk on them. Thinking of a societal and a political view of how Black people or minorities are walked on every day. So I've had it installed on the floor. Galleries have had an issue with them being installed on the floor because of the fact that they're supposed to be walked upon. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to take it to the courthouse because we keep having trials where people are killed and the killer keeps getting away. Or there's no justice at all. And it doesn't matter, their age. All that really matters is their race, right, or their classification. So I took my piece, I put it on the floor in the courthouse, and I was expecting people to walk on them. But the funny thing is that people walked around them. So they're respecting the artwork more than they're respecting the people. So when I started creating more of the colorful ones or playing around with color, for example, like this one that's on the screen, Sue, I created this during my Handbridge residency in July. And I was there with a group of artists and I was explaining to them the concept, and they said, you have two pieces. One is more of a powerful image, which is the one with color, and one is a little bit darker, right? So you have this idea of the silhouette being invisible. It also should remind you of the white line when people pass away or something has happened to them, right? Which is very common growing up in Jersey. It's what I've seen. So why not put that paper on the floor, which might make viewers a little bit more comfortable stepping on them, and showcase the power of the figure in front, so that it's showcasing both things that I want to talk about in a powerful way where they both talk to each other. So currently they're in this kind of installation, but who knows? I mean, maybe once I read another book that talks about deeper issues.
Yeah, and this is another version of Brooklyn, Betty, which is lovely. And these are very large. And what is interesting is that in separating creating the negative with the positive, I don't know, it's almost something that repeats in your work, just the way you just described, the fact that it's your thinking and it may change again. I love the way in which certain images and ideas feed into work. It's almost, sometimes you go back and you bring something from something you created a while ago into your contemporary work. It's like this never-ending thought process that you engage with through your materials and process. So, but I want to go and talk about the negative space that we're looking at here, and the idea of that negative space, that sort of nothingness, and talk about it in relation to your other work. And let me see if I can find, we see this sort of shadow figure in the middle of this street on the left. We see the shadow figure in our story on the right. This is from 2015, 2017. But we also see it in Fraction, this figure in Fraction in 2019. You're working with it. But when I look at this collage again, and I look at all of the details, that shape reappears again in City Girl in 2020, right? Yeah. So, Kandy, tell us about this process and how the same sort of shape, we could say, a similar shape or a similar reference to a figure, how you sort of appropriate it from earlier work and transform it in terms of meaning, form. This is a standalone piece, I think, rather that it's literally not a square, it's a cutout. You use the shape itself as the matrix, for the shape of your matrix. And then the city comes in again, and this is Miami, Kandy. This is Miami. This is Miami. So talk a little bit about shadow and shape and form and body, and how you sort of redeploy it and what it might mean from place to place as you move through.
You'll notice that I have a lot of females, or the identity of female, what a female stands for within my works. Obviously, I'm Afro-Caribbean female, so it's a way of me connecting to myself. So this silhouette, which is what I tell my students all the time, don't throw away your stuff, because you never know when you might need it again. Something might fall in the studio and all of a sudden, oh snap, that could be a piece on its own, or it'll trigger another piece. Like, it's important to keep even what you think is garbage, because it might come back. So this was one of those where I was like, oh, I like the silhouette when I cut it out of the print, because I also am a printmaker. Which I'm constantly like cutting and collaging, and collage work became really important to me when I was pregnant with my first child, because I needed to work smaller, right? So this piece is actually, I think it's 14 by 11, so it's a little bit smaller. I went to Opa-locka, which is, you know, not what people think of when they think of Miami. Like you were mentioning, like South Beach is where you go, right, when you come as a visitor, but you don't go into real Miami, like what it needs to be for people that live here. And I took pictures of these places and cut them out and created this silhouette out of, you know, different areas in Opa-locka, and sometimes Little Havana or Little Haiti, and places that are, you know, again, getting gentrified slowly. So it's kind of like an homage, this one, to the real Miami, and, you know, a girl that's grown up in these particular locations and what it means to me.
Yeah, I'm going to switch to Patricia in a moment, but while I start our conversation with Patricia, I want you to think about the question of Blackness. Yes. Like when you're creating these pieces, how does the idea or the question of Blackness emerge in the subject, the form, and the decisions that you're making? So, you know, in terms of the compositions. So I'm going to leave you with that for a moment. And then I'm going to switch over a little bit to Patricia, because part of, I wanted to do this transition here, Patricia, partly because you also work with shadows and cutouts, and I thought it was a good place to begin. And you're also interested in Black embodiment, but you tend to work in series, which is slightly different from Kandy. And you both use collage a lot as well. So there are lots of similarities here. And I thought that this piece and this series, in a sense, connected you both, your bodies of work in really interesting ways. So I'm here trying to think of Miami as a subject in Kandy's work, even though she's resisting me a little bit. But I want you to talk about place and Blackness and your use of the shadow or the negative space, even though that's not a complete shadow when I look at it. Very carefully. What are you suggesting through that in your piece, where we could also say that in Miami, right? I Live Where You Vacation series, and particularly this collage work that you're doing here.
Yeah. Well, thank you, first of all, everyone, for tuning in and be here with us. Kandy, I really love your work, and there were a few things that I would like to piggyback and go back to it. Yeah, I love the whole idea of black fashion and the core with the whole Rittenhouse situation case too. It's such like important conversations that we can have and continue forever, but we have limited time today. And about the series I'm From Where You Vacation, similar to Kandy, I also try to center the figures, normally female figures as well. The whole series is like challenging the idea of Caribbean as paradise. As you guys mentioned earlier, like, oh, people go, for instance, Miami, they go to South Beach, but no, when you go outside of this little area, you can run into several like spaces and neighborhoods that are now this idea of like vacation land, no? And that's normally where these marginalized people and bodies are placed normally, and ignored by the state or the city, no? So it is not exception, or it's not different in the Dominican Republic, that's where I'm from originally. And I try with this series just like combine these like imageries of like the getaway advertisement, but then like trying to relocate it or put it together in a form that you can see the polarized realities that the Caribbean could look like, or tropical spaces, no? And in the case of this particular image with the shadowing, like what I find really interesting, it was like how you can perceive this element of the shadow, even though that the body is placed in a really bright spot, in outdoor space. And the title of this one is like No ID. So it's some sort of like touching the invisible space that people like immigrants and that can suffer when they come out to other spaces, like this alien type of experience that, well, I mean, we get aliens numbers, we're named aliens at the end of the day, no? So it's kind of like create this surreal space or moment where you are not there, you're not here, you don't belong here or belong there. And that's like the role of the shadows in this particular image.
Yeah, it's really interesting because a couple years, I work a lot on, at least I used to, probably more so than I do now, on this idea of paradise, right? And I'm always curious about the way tourism works or doesn't work in the Caribbean. And many years ago, there was a government ad. I guess the local islanders weren't kind enough to tourists. So the government put out an ad that said, look, you're a walking tourist attraction, be kind, you too are a walking tourist attraction. And I thought of that when I saw this piece of yours, partly because it's almost as if you're pushing back against that absenting, by that sort of self policing in a way that Caribbean countries put on their own citizens in service to this sort of exterior view of themselves. And once again, you use the shadow, this sort of quote unquote empty place to in a sense communicate that absence. And I found that very interesting here. Do you want to comment on this before I move to the other images in this series?
Yeah, of course. Like again, it's like, as the title says, what is paradise? It's like, who is this paradise is built for? Like when we see this type of like advertisements or imagery of the Caribbean, it is like a completely untrue reality for people that are local, or not even local. Like you can be a foreign person, but also like based on your race, you could be treated in a certain way and being allowed to access certain places and others. I myself have been stood out from beaches in my own country, like, oh, you're not allowed to lay here. I'm like, how's that even possible?
Yeah.
So, and then again, yes, it's just like, you see how and sometimes it's like, this attitude and these views are so internalized that the local themselves can stop themselves for enjoying and advancing into these blessing of landscapes and spaces that we own, right? Because that's our home, it's our homeland. And I think like that's where something that this shadow represents in this one particular is like that internalized colonialism, but also but at the same time it's like how the spaces outside stop them themselves, no? Because it's this element that is just projecting within the landscape itself. Yeah. So it's the duality of those type of like policing, no? Of like it's internal, but also external policing or stopping situation within the locals and the space.
Yeah, and in this series, as much as Kandy insists on that city landscape, your landscape is this kind of tropical place, right? This sort of tropical, the bamboo, the philodendrons, the just these really these um, identical. These identifiable images that we associate with tropicalization or the tropics or paradise. And what I find funny is that I can get all of this at Home Depot too, and Lowe's. I can buy these plants and recreate them. So they're kind of, you can, and that tells you how this sort of tropicalism has been commodified in a particular way. But here, it's almost like a garment. It's almost, you're doing something different here with these images. The hand that comes out with the gun, the hand with the gloves, and for some reason I'm not going back fast enough, but it wants me to stay on this image. So let's talk about this image.
Let's get into technology.
Series. Yeah.
So that's something I try. All the images that I use are normally I take it from getaway advertisements images that you can find it. So it's like I try to be really intentional of these type of images that could be really common or like easy to replicate to an extent, because that's another way of like simplifying what the Caribbean or the Atlantic world is that the global north tend to do. It's like how we are so simplified within these standardized landscapes or nature, right? And but like some sort of like taking away the culture, the capability of being more than that. And the region becomes just this space for people to just vacation, right? Instead of like search for culture, search for knowledge, search for spirituality, like there is so much to give and there's so much more to these spaces. But it's all simplified in these images. So I try to also like take that as a part of like my intentional, like the intention of like showcasing like how it is diminished, the Atlantic world or in the Caribbean, no? And in the case of this particular one with the gun, it's like, again, it's like the typical palm trees that you can see and you can normally lay down and just chat, while you sunbathing yourself. But then it's this element of this reacting or some sort of like negating this experience, like this is not only that, and it's some sort of like a situation of, I don't know, of liberation, but self-defense and survival. So that's like what I'm trying to portray within this space itself. Again, like reminiscing like the female voice, because ni una más means not one more, which is like the a slogan for the Me Too movement, but in Latin America. And it's also like a self-defense, because normally like the most vulnerable people are like women of color in the Caribbean.
Well, let's talk about race a little bit, colorism, because this particular series, the Black Behind the Air series, has incredibly provocative images and materials. And talk a little bit too about your process, because we see these as almost as images, but you are doing they're almost vignettes, right? You're pulling things together, you're making things, you are constructing the images that we're seeing in very purposeful and intentional ways. Tell us a little bit about the Black Behind the Air series, what's behind that in the context of the DR, and yeah, talk a little bit about it, and talk about it in relation to this image, which I find just incredibly striking in so many ways.
Thank you. I really appreciate the compliment. Well, the title of the series comes from a poem from the late 1800s by Dominican activist and poet Juan Antonio Alix, where he is claiming that Dominicanness is not only one race, has been constructed by several, and specifically the Black African roots, no? And then he's claiming, or some sort of like demanding to Dominican people to do not be ashamed of it and claim our Blackness. And like, it doesn't matter why your grandmother is or your own complexion is, we all have some Black behind in our ear. But I'm in a process at this moment that I'm just like, no, our Blackness is not really behind the ear, it's actually in our forehead. But when, it's like super obvious. But at the end, yes, but at the end of the day, when I started this series, it was really impactful for me reading these poems from around 200 years ago, and it's still being so relevant to what is going on in Dominican culture and in our heritage, no? Mm-hmm. And so I took the different elements and tried to recontextualize our quotidian heritage, no? And like elements like the hair roller, like, an element of beauty, the food like plantains, avocados. I also did like the bottle of rum, which I did one time, and also sugar, like the sugar cane self, and try to redo it in a different form where we could appreciate it. And like for these elements that we can see here, that it's like a cone, and the rollers are made of porcelain and ceramics. There are different materials that I use. And the reason why I end up using these materials, this particular medium, is because it's a medium that is, you can see it in the three of the pillars of Dominican heritage, which is the indigenous Tainos, Black, African, and as well Spanish, no? So that's why I end up using this medium, and I found it perfect, and I fell in love with it when I tried it the first time, and the series was born. So yes, this one in particular is talking about our relationship to our hair textures, and how for so long it's changing today, but how for so long the whole straightening processes were really almost like a religious process. Women will go every week to the beauty salon. My mom is a hairdresser herself, so for me it was particularly tortural, like a torture, like dealing with my hair. And we have this phrase that is called, we say, like, if you want pretty hair or good hair, you have to endure the pulling. And then that's the title of this particular image. And wow, personally, that I suffered that one so much. So this is a really important image out of the entire series for me.
There's a reason why Dominican hairdressers are considered stars in the Black community. I mean, honestly, they are. But
they are good.
Did you make the ceramic pieces, the hair, the rollers, and are there elements of this? Because these are such interest. You play with iconography in an interesting way. And to be honest, when I look at Kandy's work and I look at your work, I appreciate the fact that you both take what we might regard as ordinary, or the Black ordinary, and you turn it into something extraordinary, or you say and claim, like, no, this, there's something special here. There's something wonderful about these bodies, these people that I know in my life. I can make them into monumental subjects. There's something amazing about hair rollers and avocados and plantanos. There's something wonderful that we need to hear, that we need to hold on to in this work. And I really love it. Once again, it's not working with me. Like, okay, wait a minute. Yeah. And then it does. So you with the cafecita and why ceramic? Why that element of ceramics in the work? Patricia.
So, well, first of all, yes, that's what I try to do with these elements and these bodies is to celebrate them. No, we are so often marginalized and all our culture being told or viewed through like a white or global north um, gaze or voice. That's what I'm trying to change. Like, how can we change this narrative that is being told to us how we're supposed to be and who we are, and how we can celebrate them and turn and say it with our own voices, right? So that's why for me, these elements of quotidianity are so important to place them in the center of my work. Yes, I do the pieces myself. My process is just like I take the elements, make a mold of it, and then just cast them in ceramic and fire them and do the whole process of ceramic. It would take me a little longer to explain the whole process, but that's pretty much in one sentence the way it goes. As I explained earlier, ceramics, it was just like an element that it was part of the three of our pillars of like roots. So indigenous, Spanish, and Africans use this medium, and when I started the project, I was like, let me give it a try, and I fell in love with it. And it's a medium that, because of the process itself, like everything is like to an extent, and not an accident, but there is this process of like a surprise result that it helps to the object to be unique once it's done too, and allows me to, I don't know, to navigate and enjoy the process of creating this object itself, and I don't know, and get more enamored with the narrative behind them, I guess.
Yeah, this is lovely. It's something I need in my daily life, actually. Here,
gotta make it fun.
So as this loads up, and I'm being warned that we're running out of time already, believe it or not. Wow. Both of you do residencies, you travel, you engage with communities beyond the ones that you primarily reside. And this piece, Patricia, came from a trip, I think, to Colombia, right? I know Kandy does a lot of residencies. I'm not sure if this was on a residency or how did this piece come about? And in it, particularly this piece, I love the way in which issues of like gender, race, sexuality, all of those like boundaries were sort of penetrated for me in these pieces, like that they kind of fell away or fell into each other, making it a little bit harder or it slowed down the way that I looked at them, and it made me want to look even more carefully. So talk a little bit about this series before we move on to the last one really quickly that I want to talk about today, and then we can come together for a short general conversation before we have to end, unfortunately. But yeah, talk a little.
Just quick. So this series of collages as well is called Via Yala, which is like a new term that activists from South America are trying to rename the continent. And Via Yala was a term used by the North indigenous place or located in the north of South America. That's how they called this region. Which meant land in full maturity. And since the 60s, there's been this whole movement of trying to reclaim back the land by renaming it how the original nations used to call it, so Via Yala. And then the whole term, it came to me through this collaboration with this group from Colombia that is called, they're called Como Chimbita. And they enlightened me into this whole movement and terminology and the narrative that comes behind the whole Via Yala movement. So there is this whole narrative that it would take a whole other panel to discuss. But there is this whole narrative of a Villa Yala that's what I'm trying to portray through this series, where the ambiguity or regions, or in trying to to have not these figures that are nature but are humans as well, but you cannot really tell who they really are, is the main subject behind this whole story of a Villa Yala. And some sort of like the reclamation and reclaiming back our land and reclaiming back our heritage, our history is the main concern and goal with the Villa Yala movement. And as we see in this series of a Villa Yala collages, I try to use elements that repeat throughout the series, and so sort of like allow the people themselves to give the stories to these figures, elements, and landscapes that once belonged to the native of these lands, no?
Yes.
So that's the Villa Yala series about.
Yeah, that's the short cliff note. I'm sure we could talk, like you said, for a very long time about this. But as if the final series before, come on, work with me now. This image, the Caribbean Blue series. I set it up like this simply because I wanted the horizon line to match for some strange reason. I was playing with it. Let me see if I can make it big. Yeah. Let's end the section on this series. Are you done with this series, by the way?
No, I'm not. Actually,
Okay.
the series is keep going. It's like, and this is our photograph that I've been taking in different spaces of around the Caribbean. These ones are particularly right in the borders of Haiti and Dominican Republic, and trying to challenge the idea of borders and in the Caribbean, who are like so harsh. Like if we believe that the borders here in the mainland are really hard to break, in the Caribbean, I don't know how the system have created that we are even more separate that within ourselves. And then historically, Dominican Republic and Haiti particularly have a really harsh border, and a lot of like conversations to have around healing, love, nation sisterhood, So the whole series is interesting because with this series, I have a really similar to Kandy's idea of like having these images transferred to carpets, and then having people to walk into the spaces and step on them. So wow. It is crazy. Yeah. So when she was saying that, I was just like, because, it is those type of attitudes that we see, that as she mentioned earlier, on the courthouses, and how the law and the state just completely obliterates the rights of BIPOC groups. No, it happens for regions as well. When we talk about the relationship between the global north and the global south, the only thing that attaches them together is exploitation and extraction. Mm-hmm. And something that I would like to deal with this series is borders and the relationship of the north with the south, right? So that's like something that it is a project in progress, and it has like a lot of different views as well. There is this one river in the north of Dominican Republic, in the border of Haiti and the DR, that in 1937, I don't know if you guys know about it, like there was this whole massacre, and because actually the history of that river that today is called massacre, it goes way before that, like in the 1800s, because there was another situation between French and Spanish people. And then since the early 1800s, it's been called massacre. But it happens that that particular point, things like that keeps happening. And I'm trying to make us like ethnographic study to, portray and see what is going on. And there is a big tourist project that apparently the United States with the Dominican state are trying to implement in this area as well.
Really?
So yes, something.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's in the north. It's called Montecristi, the town. Yeah, there is a really problematic situation happening there, but well, we'll see how this project continues, and hopefully I will see it as an as an installation where people can actually go and step on them. I think because it is disposable. The Caribbean, it is sadly used as a disposable space where you go and it's like, oh, I want to go, but I don't want the locals there. And that's the attitude, how it's being used and portrayed and diminished too. And that's something that it needs to be changed and addressed, no?
Yeah.
Locally and internationally.
And I think that's why these images in particular, because there's the emptiness of it, right? You would think no one lived there. You could almost recreate your own discovery myth right here, right? And these empty, isolated beaches, etc. But thank you. I'm going to stop screen sharing for a moment, and we can continue the conversation. But I just want Marilyn Holifield and the rest of the group to perhaps chime in now, and otherwise we'll keep going. I have more questions.
Hello. Oh my goodness, what a great conversation. I loved every moment of it. Both artists are phenomenal, and I appreciate you so much for coming and being on our program. Now, I'm going to move the show along a little bit. I'm going to introduce Orlando Addison. Orlando Addison has been a participant in all of our other panels beforehand. He is a writer and an Episcopal priest and founder of the Ernesto Gamboa Project. Born to Jamaican descendant parents in Tela, Honduras, he developed an affinity for literature and embraced Afro-Latinx causes from a young age. Orlando uses his Afro-Latinx experience as inspiration for his writing. His writing appeared in El Nuevo Herald, American Latina en Movimiento, among other publications. He also publishes articles on Medium. Orlando Addison, welcome. Oh, your mic.
Oh, there we go. I'm sorry. Thank you for the opportunity, and what a wonderful moment we had there with Kandy and Patricia sharing their artwork, and it's just amazing to see how their work really has some kind of a resemblance in a way, particularly with the concept of the shadow. I just love those images of the shadows, because those shadows represent in some way the Afro-Latino and Afro-Latina spirit in itself. I mean, both of you, Kandy and Patricia, you, in your art, in your work, you I don't know if it's in a conscious way or unconsciously projects the spirituality of the Afro-Latino, particularly the Afro-Latino female part of it. But at the same time, the entire community, I mean, it's symbolized in your images. The shadow, those shadows are a representation of the Afro-Latino community who have been living for centuries in the shadows in Latin America. So I really was able to somehow connect with that and to see how that the Afro-Latino community was represented in your pieces. the other part also, and I think, Kandy, you perhaps talk a little bit about the, not only in terms of the shadow, but the invisibility too of the community, and how that invisibility, particularly with the shape of your pieces, is symbolized in each one of them. I was really struck by that, to see and it also shows a part of the history too of the Afro-Latino community. So both of you are really doing a extremely great work by representing us. And also, Patricia, one more thing about the work that I saw with the particularly with the green, and I was able to associate, you know, the human connection with nature, with the hands and the palm trees and all that, the spirituality behind that you projected in your art. So I both of you are doing great job. Congratulations, and I hope to, you know, be able to continue seeing more work from both of you.
Thank you, Orlando. That was phenomenal. Now we're going to move to our Q&A, and I'm going to hand it over to Luz Estrella Cruz, our intern in charge.
Thank you, Corbin. And thank you, Kandy and Patricia, for an amazing conversation led by Dr. James, who I know familiar from UM in my classes. This has been a really amazing hearing more about your art practices and more about your inspirations and why you do the work that you do. And now I have 2 questions, I believe, for each of you from the audience. I'm going to start with Kandy first. One person asked, what were some of the first materials outside of paint that you used in your work? And do you prefer creating larger or smaller pieces, and which mediums tell your story best? Let me know if I need to ask those questions.
3 questions in one.
I know, I'm sorry.
I prefer larger pieces. Like I mentioned, I have the Napoleon complex, so the bigger the better. I also feel like it sends a more powerful message when it's big, unless the message is to get the viewer to really dissect. Like I have drawings that are about an inch or maybe half an inch of African-American men who have been imprisoned, and the whole sheet of paper is white, and they're about an inch. So when you come into the gallery with white frames, you just think it's a white sheet of paper. But in reality, when you like really look to see where the artwork is, they're like at the corner of the sheet, so they're invisible in the space. So that's one. So I like bigger works. I'm gonna say yarn right now because that's what I'm working with. So just this whole idea of stepping on is something that I'm really interested within my work currently. So yarn is my medium of choice. And I don't know what the first question was. I got the 2.
The first one was, what were some of the first materials outside of paint that you used in your artwork?
Ceramics. So me and Patricia have that too in common. So I started working with ceramics and creating little iconographic vessels or vases that you put, you know, flowers in, or you pour things like libations out of. And I didn't understand what I was making. I just made. But now looking back at it, you know, all the stuff is connected. It makes sense. So yes, Patricia, we need a show.
I would love to see it. And then
Coming soon.
Some questions for Patricia include, what would you say is the overall theme in your artwork, and how do you stay inspired?
Oh, that's a great question. As you can see, my whole media and forms are a little bit all over the place, but my overall theme is the Caribbean celebration. and the celebration of BIPOC communities within the Atlantic world. I just really feel that we have been forgotten throughout history in so many forms and shapes, and I really believe in the process of rescuing those voices and that forgotten history. And not forgotten, but it's being told to us in the wrong way. And the reshaping of all of that, it is the goal of my work at the end of the day. And what was the second question? How I stay inspired. So it's reading. That's my answer. I just gladly, I'm so blessed. I'm about to finish my MA in Latin American Caribbean Studies. I'm presenting my thesis on December 15th. So yay. And I would say that the process of going back to school and being into the relearning and unlearning a lot of the things that I had in my brain, in my being, it's just been the main source for me to stay connected with my narrative and my discourse in my artwork. Yeah.
No, thank you. One question does ask for both of you, and I think both of you could answer. It says that both of your work deals with some heavy themes, untold histories, and engaging with Blackness in a way that counteracts narratives that already persist in the global North. How do you guys remain positive or take care of yourselves as you interrogate this work and embed it in your art practice?
I feel like the images that are put out every day in the media, the trials that keep popping up, things that I see, the microaggressions, really takes a toll. There are times where I have to decompress, so I turn everything off. Like, I don't want to hear anything, I don't want to see anything. There has been like months where I just don't watch, like the news is not on at all, but you know, things keep popping up here and there. Have you heard of, and I feel like reading really helps to further educate others, because there's a lot of people, even your family members, that say things that are racially charged and they are not aware of what it is that they're saying because someone else has said it, so it's like regurgitating what you think is the right thing to say when in reality it's not. So I feel like reading helps, and stepping away in certain areas help, and also having like a really strong supportive group to, like, you know, discuss and let out your frustration is important to have, so that you don't, you know, go down a rabbit hole. That's for me.
Wow. That was such a good question. And it's a big part of my internal work for my process. And I agree with everything that Kandy says. It's just like, it's the understanding of, it's the balance, you know? It's when you know that you're able to be there for others, build a community for support that you can love and receive love from. I think that's extremely important for me, and I'm extremely blessed of having a beautiful community here in New York City. Also, you know, the process of healing, it's just like internal healing all the time. You know, the learning process is a way for me to be in peace, you know, and to being able to navigate my surrounder in a more, how can I say, conscious way, you know, be more intentional how I move and how I talk and how I communicate. That's therapy, mental health. It is a real thing. So, and me for winter, you know, up here in New York City, it is a real thing as a Caribbean person. So escaping back home. My family's down there. They always welcome me and give me some love when I go, and warm when I go there. I recharge and then come back, you know, to the daily, you know, work, you know. So, because it is always a process of growing and on learning and learning, no? So that's the way I see it.
No, it's amazing to hear that you both have communities that you can rely on to kind of digest the things that we see in the media, as well as the things that you interrogate in your personal work. And I guess a final question for both of you, and maybe something to help the audience. How do you hope your work reaches your community or people outside your community, and what would you ideally like them to take away when they engage with your work?
Personally, I want my audience to notice that they are seen. I think it's important for me as a minority artist to showcase and show people that are also minorities and are also making work. Like, it's important for me to have reached the level of professor, to be an example for my students. Like, just because you're other doesn't mean that you can't. So that's something that I want them to take away. And then with other people viewing my work, to let them know that we're here and we're not going nowhere.
Yes, bravo, Kandy, to those words. Yes, yes. I don't know. A lot of my work is directed to my people, to Dominican Republic. I believe there is a lot of harm, a lot of things to heal, a lot of love to give and put in my people. I just really want them to free themselves mentally, spiritually, systematically. It is in, you know, the situation that is happening right now down there through the pandemic, having a new government, the anti-Haitian movement every day growing. I'm just like, wow, my people, like, what is the idea of nationality when it's all based on hate, when it's all based on anti-human rights? You know, it's just like, come on, DR, you need to wake up. And those patterns are that happens down there. I see them repeat everywhere in different forms, you know, throughout the, you know, the whole Trump government administration. We saw a lot of hate rising to the surface that is being there. And, you know, sadly, that's how it helped us to like point it out and be like, yo, we need to work on that, right? But I don't know, I just really hope that my work allows to get rid of those colonial patterns that we continue to repeat and fall into. I try to talk about imperialism to anti-colonialism, you know, and those are like really big things that we need to, that are all attached to capitalism and the systematic racism that we live in. So I know it's a lot that I'm putting on my artwork.
No, I just want to say, I for both of these artists, I don't think they understand how generous they are with their work in terms of getting it seen. I think for Patricia, you use Instagram a lot. The images that you create, you share, you know, you share them quite a bit. For Kandy, I was just really struck by the fact that she was as excited to show her work at the AIM Biennial as the YMCA. Right? She just wants to get it out there, and she wants people to interact with them. And I think there's that consciousness to not just make the work for themselves, but to allow the work to do work in the community and with the people they want to address is very much present with these artists. And it was just really great working with you on this project, Kandy and Patricia, and getting to know you better. I mean, you're in my heart. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you all three of you for giving such amazing answers, and I hope the crowd took as much as I did from the way that you guys answered the questions. And so now I'm going to pass it back to my colleague Corbin to introduce Ms. Holifield for our closing remarks.
Yes, excuse me. Hello. Okay, before I introduce Marilyn Holifield for closing remarks, I'd like to encourage anyone who is able to stay afterwards for a more casual and intimate conversation. Marilyn Holifield is partner in Holland and Knight LLP, an international law firm that traces its history to 1890s. She obtained her Bachelor of Arts in Economics and concentration in Black Studies from Swarthmore College, Juris Doctorate from Harvard, and an honorary doctorate of Human Letters at Barry University. While growing up, outreach by Florida A&M University supported her involvement in the arts, music, visual, dance, journalism, and children's theater. Her continued involvement includes her collection of artwork from the African diaspora, her work as co-founder of Miami MoCAAD, and her desire to create a space for artists and arts lovers of the African diaspora to connect, learn, and grow. Now, I will hand the floor over to Marilyn Holifield for closing remarks.
Thank you, Corbin. Thanks to all of you who joined us this evening. And let's give lots of thumbs up and applause to our moderator, Professor Erica James, who probed artists Kandy Lopez and Patricia Encarnación for an amazing conversation, and author advocate Orlando Addison, who gave an overarching wrap-up. Thanks for taking us inside art that reflects culture, tells stories, and speaks visually beyond what words can say. You, our panelists, said our names with themes rejecting invisibility and marginalization, with swagger and style that express a certain defiance. You spoke to us through your art of the history of resistance that Orlando has spoken about in prior sessions. Art, fashion, and culture that illuminate history, place, and humanity of people of African descent. And art, your art, to rescue voices, culture, untold stories, and present counter narratives to conventional notions of Blackness. Thank you for sharing parallel stories and providing a framework for understanding our present. Let us also thank our producers who handled countless things behind the scenes and kept us on track. Museum Working Group member and volunteer extraordinaire, Michelle Johnson. Miami MoCAAD's Director of Interactive Media and manager of our fantastic internship program, Corbin Graves. And our amazing student interns and recent graduates, Ashley Caleb and Christian Allen, who managed our links, and Luz Estrella Cruz, who made sure that the question and answer session was riveting. Thanks again for joining us this afternoon, and also for your support on Give Miami Day. As Corbin mentioned at the outset, if you missed Give Miami Day, there's still another opportunity on Giving Tuesday. Go to miamimocaad.org and support Miami MoCAAD. Again,